Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deborah Reeves, the Coordinator of Research Services in the Victorian Parliamentary Library. Firstly, on behalf of the Parliament and its members, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today. We pay our respects to them, their culture, their elders past and present, and we also pay our respects to people from First Nations communities who may be joining us. I welcome you to our seminar today, which is posing the question, what are we doing about soft plastics recycling? I'm sure it's all crossed your minds at some point. We're pleased to present this event jointly with ATSE, the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering. Our moderator today is Dr. Ian Dagley. Ian is the Chief Executive Officer of the recently funded Solving Plastic Waste Cooperative Research Centre. Prior to this appointment, he was Chief of the Science Partnerships and Engagement Division of the Defence Science and Technology Group, and he was also the CEO of the CRC for Polymers for 21 years. Ian is also a Fellow of ATSE. When we get to questions a little bit later, we'll have a second microphone roaming around, so please wait for that to arrive before you shoot off your question. I'll just hand over to Ian now. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and it's a great pleasure to be moderating this session, which is the fourth and final joint presentation for 2025. So you've seen the question, and that is, what are we doing about soft plastics recycling? This is a really important issue. Only 6% of the soft plastics we use in Australia, that's about over 500,000 tonnes of soft plastic which enter the Australian market each year is recycled. We need to find viable solutions that mitigate the environmental impact of soft plastics, but additionally, we need to meet the expectations of households that are sceptical as a result of the collapse of the REDcycle scheme. So we're very fortunate to have two expert panel members to discuss industry's response to these challenges. And I'm going to introduce them before they speak. So the first presenter today is Brooke Donnelly. Brooke is the Group General Manager Sustainability for Coles. She heads a team that looks at a wide range of different aspects of sustainability, including circularity. She has over 25 years' experience in the sector, and she has a Master's in Management in Sustainable Leadership from Macquarie University and a Certificate of Management Excellence from Harvard Business School. Our second presenter is Darren Thorpe. Darren has been in the industry for over 40 years. He's highly regarded, as evidenced by him recently receiving the industry's highest award for leadership just in the last few weeks. So congratulations for that great achievement, Darryl. He's also the Director of the APR Group. The APR Group provides solutions to curbside recycling of paper, plastic and glass. And prior to establishing the APR Group, Darren was a Senior Manager in Visy Recycling, and he was a State Manager as well. So I'd like to now hand over to Brooke. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think we might have gone a little bit further forward than intended, but there we are. Lovely to see you all here this afternoon. As Ian said, I have been in this caper for a little while now. I go for the 25-year plus mark, but it's a little bit more than that. But I have been at Coles for about 3 years, and it was approximately about maybe 3 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks after I walked into the door in one of the largest businesses in Australia, and stepping into a large and complex organisation, super excited about all the sustainability stuff I could do, and the world imploded in soft plastics. So that has been a big part of my world for the last 3 years, but prior to that I was actually the CEO for the Australian Packaging Covenant for the previous 6 years. So sustainable packaging is a little bit of my jam, and it's where I've lived and what I've worked in for a very long time. But soft plastics is one of those wicked embedded environmental problems that we often seek to solve with environmental solutions, but in actuality requires economic solutions. It requires the funding of the systems, etc., and all those kind of things. But let's talk a little bit on how we got to here today. So it was November 2022 when we did see the collapse of the REDcycle program. It's funny, it's one of those things that over time in the many, many conversations that I've had people say to me, it was, the collapse that we needed to have, and you know how popular that was for some other politicians on a different issue previously. Not a popular thing to say, but probably somewhat of a truism in the fact that the system broke at 3% of the material flow. So REDcycle was operating in retail stores across Australia, but it was only collecting and processing 3% of the material that was put onto market. So the fact that it was ever going to be a overall solution, or that it will be today, was never actually a reality. It was a great and amazing program that for 10 years taught all of us how to sort soft plastics, how to understand what they are, and how we could contribute to that. And so that behavioural practice that it actually drew out, incredibly valuable. And if we want to look at REDcycle and say what were some great things that came from that, it was that. But the fact that it would be a solution for all things for soft plastics, as Ian said, depending on who you ask, it's somewhere between 500 plus thousand tonnes that are put onto market every year. As you can imagine, 3% is a very small margin of that. So to think that we could resolve the issue of soft plastics by simply putting bins in retail stores is, if somewhat, a little bit naive. So a big part of the work that we've had to do in the last 3 years is not only meet our customer needs in terms of re-establishing a program that could provide some of that collection pathway, but really also work across the supply chain and across government and industry to actually then form up solutions that are real and tangible, long-term sustainable solutions for Australia. And that's where we've kind of come at this from a couple of different angles. So we had the collapse of REDcycle. Unfortunately, when that did happen, we also had an incredibly large stockpile of material that had not been recycled at that point in time. It was approximately around about 11,000 tonnes stored at various sites across Australia. What I can tell you right now, 2.5 years later, is that there's only 3,000 of that tonnes left. And that is because we have actually managed to recycle that material. It hasn't gone to landfill. It's been contained, it's been collected. We created what was called the Soft Plastics Task Force, which was approved through the ACCC, and it was for the first time ever bringing together the big three retailers, Woolworths, Coles and Aldi, to try and find a solution to the REDcycle collapse. Part of that, Woolworths and Coles took responsibility for that stockpile in terms of the cost to remediate it and to manage it and to make sure that it was actually recycled as we had promised our customers that we would do when they dropped that off in our bins. And I think one of my kind of personal joys that I take is that we've actually been able to do that, because the easiest thing, of course, would have been able to put that to landfill, but we actually haven't done that. We've actually worked and funded and invested in infrastructure to be able to create a pathway to recycle that material. And the upside of that is that we've actually then been able to use that material to accelerate infrastructure, to accelerate the testing of how to recycle more efficiently. And, Darren will come up soon and tell you more about all that fun part of it, so I won't go into the technical detail. But if we're looking for an upside from what at the time was quite a disastrous situation, I can clearly look back now and say, I think two big things. One, we really had that behaviour from consumers and customers understanding how to sort soft plastics. But two, the stockpile actually has been, we've been able to reuse that in terms of it being a foundational feedstock to accelerate the infrastructure for soft plastics and for us to be able to test and accelerate that work, which is not something we would have been able to do otherwise. Oh, look at that, we've made it work. Excellent. So, where did that land us to? What we very, very quickly realised was the problem is way bigger than supermarkets. We have, for the last year, as a soft plastics task force, so Woolworths, Coles and Aldi, we have had trials in some stores across our store networks to test whether consumers would still return soft plastics. We've done it very quietly, we've done it in a way to see if there is an engagement that people would actually engage in that program. And the great thing is that people have, that behaviour has continued, and once the option is available, people are participating. So that's been a fantastic part of that. But what we realise in that is if the system broke at 3% before, the chances of us having a meaningful impact in soft plastics, it's got to be more than just retail. So that's where, as a soft plastics task force and retailers, we actually then reached out to the Australian Food and Grocery Council, who for some time had a program called NPRS, and that had a whole group of other brands involved, and you can see some of them on the screen here: Unilever, Mars, Nestle, etc. And they had been working on some different technologies for quite some time. What we decided that we would do is that we would collectively, as an industry, come together. And so we brought together the task force and we brought together the AFGC work, and we created an NGO called Soft Plastic Stewardship Australia. And I sit as a director on the board of that organisation right now, and that is the product stewardship organisation that is building the future for soft plastics and the recycling program here in Australia. It's incredibly exciting. It's exciting because just last week, we received authorisation from the ACCC for a levy for soft plastics in Australia. It's the first time it has ever happened. It means that that environmental problem that we've got has now got a part of the economic solution that it requires. It doesn't mean the job is done. I wish, but it's not. We do need to build end markets. We need to build the program for collection and recycling, etc., and all those kind of things. But every single one of these brands that you see shown here on this screen, and also this is a conglomerate of both the Soft Plastics Task Force and the NPRS program together, and now we are working through the new entity of Soft Plastic Stewardship Australia to deliver soft plastic recycling and collection nationally. It will take us some years to do that. There's an infrastructure build that needs to happen. Darren will talk to you more about what that means for organisations like himself, but it's an incredibly exciting time, for such an important issue here in Australia, and very quietly progress is being made, and progress has been made in quite a significant way. I also thought I'd tell you, just while I was here, we'd give you a little bit of information around Coles and what circularity means for us. I think I've never worked, I'm not a retailer by trade, it's not my thing. I can shop, I'm good at that, but I'm not a retailer by trade by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a third generation recycler, and that's where I came up through my family business. So retail has been a really interesting experience for me, and I'm like everybody else who is not a retailer by trade, had lots of opinions about how retailers work until I actually worked in a retailer and found out a whole bunch of things that I assumed I knew, but it wasn't actually really across. And I think some of the work that they do and Coles does in circularity is actually really incredible. And our view, and this is our 2030 strategy, is around circularity is really about transitioning towards a circular economy by materially reducing waste through recycling and reuse and product stewardship. So we don't see that circularity equals recycling. We think that recycling is part of circularity. We think it's about reduction, it's about reuse, it's about an entire ecosystem of solutions that are required to achieve circularity. It's about making sure that we get materials into that loop and that they are doing that circular loop round and round, and we're maximising the utilisation of those materials. But I think it's also important to acknowledge some of the incredible progress that's been made. So here in Coles, we are now up to about 600 million pieces of plastic that we've removed from various products and specifications. We have also right now about 87.6% of our packaging is either recyclable or degradable. So, you know, it's about organisations and industry coming together to really drive circularity in a different way. But I know that Darren is going to pop up here now and chat to you all about closing the loop on soft plastics.
Good afternoon all, how are we? I'm better now, I can relax. Thanks Brooke, that was really, really good. But what I'd like to do is take you along on a mission. It's not a journey, I don't like talking about journeys, I like talking about missions. So on closing loop of soft plastics, since 2019, 2020, we needed to find a solution, and we were working in conjunction with Liz at RedCycle as well, but we needed to find a solution through our curbside business. Our curbside business receives, and we instigated the purple lidded bin, so sorry, that was us. But we needed to get the glass out of the yellow lidded bin because it was creating a whole lot of contamination and a lot of product that was unnecessarily going to landfill because it was contaminated with glass or with the contents of the glass bottle. So that's been working along very nicely, but the next problem was the community wanted to recycle soft plastics, but the issue you have with soft plastics is if you take one piece of soft plastics, and this is a confectionery item, and put it in your yellow lidded bin, it doesn't get recycled because A, it's too small, and B, it's too cumbersome, or it's not economic to pick off the line, even though we are doing it because we wanted to walk the walk and not just talk it. So what we chose to do is try and find a solution for that. You needed to build a supply chain, and that's what we went on the mission of doing. So the problem that we've got is, Ian and Brooke both mentioned there's excess of 500,000, but let's just take the poor old confectionery item. Everybody knows what a confectionery item is. There's some on the table over the back there. There's some, as you can see up there, that you've got a number of items there that we all like to consume, and what happens is that packaging goes into landfill. So there's 350,000 tonnes of that put onto the market, and currently there's that much recycled. All right? That's how we can move the dial real quick, is to be able to capture that material and turn it back into a circular outcome. The solution we've found, I went over to Germany and I found technology, which I'll explain here, which the exciting part is that will be operational in 2 weeks, and I can't wait. It's been 5 years since we've been working on this program. But initially what we need to do is we needed to find some platforms that the consumer could participate. For example, Coles, and now the Return to Store program is back in play. These are the sorts of containers, and inside this is soft plastics that I recover at home. I can then take that to stores now. They're not all stores, but some stores, and put that out, and that'll come back to us, and we'll sort it and bale it and send it. It was going up to Cundall, but when our plant gets operational in the next couple of weeks, that'll come to us. The other option you've got is a subscription option that, as a consumer, we like to give you options. So there's a subscription option called Kirby that you can subscribe to, and you can take that to a recycling outlet, and that will be recycled. So that's another option that we've got. But the one we're working on to make things easy is what we call the bag in the bin. So the bag in the bin is where you're given an orange bag, which we were doing with the NPRS program, which Brooke mentioned, and we want to scale this. So we'll give each household an orange bag. We'll ask them to put scrunchable soft plastics in it, put it into your yellow lidded bin, and then it would come to us at our facility. Easy to operate, easy to work in, makes sense for it to happen. Once it gets to our place and when it gets to scale, I'll put it in perspective. For us to operate a 90 tonne a day facility, we would need 92 million of these to be able to sort. To get 92 million, you need to have infrastructure to handle that. So we know we're not going to get 92 million, but we need to get a system in place to make it easy to be able to sort that. So we'll use the suction system to pick that off, take that down, and then we'll take it from our sorting facility in Truganina, and it'll go to Dandenong, where it will go through a 20-tonne a day facility initially, because we need to do this slowly, we need to do it methodically, and we need to ensure there is a supply chain. So that facility there will be operational at the end of December, and it will do 20 tonne a day of material, of which 40% of it will be set up for the multi-layered material, 20% of it will go out as monomer, which is a single layer of coloured film, and the other 20% will go as clear film, which will go through, for technical terms, it's called mechanical recycling, which is just basically washing it. The advanced recycling program that we've got, which is being installed in Bacchus Marsh as we speak, and as I said, will be, I hope my Christmas present is making oil, that I get a bag of oil for Christmas, that's all I want, because we've been working on this for 5 years. So the material will come through here, it'll end up in a reactor, and that reactor will, through heat, separate the layers of the plastic. So when you look inside this packaging is the right packaging for the right product. It's a cheap packaging, it is packaging that protects the contents. If we remove that barrier film, and this packaging has been around for 50 or 60 years, by the way, we just haven't caught up with the recycling of it. If we remove this packaging, that food becomes off, and we have a bigger waste, a food waste problem, than we have a packaging problem. So a packaging problem. So that's where we need to turn around and separate the two. And the way to separate it is with heat. So that heat will then take that plastic back to gas, and then it will turn it into an oil. That oil will replace the fossil crude. So this is a synthetic crude that we'll manufacture, and then we'll send it to our partner in Singapore, who will mass balance it and turn it back into a virgin resin, which is this material here, and that then will make packaging as it does today. So it becomes a complete circular outcome. So in other words, we can now take a Kit Kat wrapper, a chip packet, or a popcorn packet, and turn it back into the same product that it was, without the reliance on fossil crude. Right? The issue that we need to do is, how do we scale that to 100 tonne a day to make it accessible? We turn the dial, we go from 6%, as Ian said, up to 20%. But how do we do that? Well, we do that with having solutions in place such as that. But what we need to do is we need to work with processors to get the feedstock, which is the material. We need to get some funding through some programs such as the SPSA, such as the landfill levy, such as opportunities alike. And the big one that will drive it as we go along is the mandatory reform, is to ensure that the brands want to do it, but the brands need to be we're encouraging them to do it at the moment and having about 15% opportunity to do it, but we really need to get 100%. So they can have, for example, that packaging that I just had there, on it, it says made from 70% recycled plastic. So they've imported that plastic from overseas, packaged it here, which is great. They've done the right thing. But once we've consumed it, it goes to landfill right now. So it's a linear process, and it goes to landfill. We need to get that out of landfill, and the way we do that is to ensure that that program is in place. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, both presenters. Can you please come forward for a question and answer session? And I think they've really accurately described the current situation. And I notice we've already got a question. Yes, please.
Thank you. I noticed you referred to some German technology. Do you, compelling manufacturers to recycle, are the German laws sort of the best in the world when it comes to compelling manufacturers to take responsibility for their packaging? And also in Australia, the fact that it's states that have to deal with landfill, but isn't packaging federal law. So given that, you know, the federal government doesn't have to sort of deal with landfill, are they motivated?
You go first, I guess.
Yes, yes, and yes. Yes, it is a state-based issue, but it is a federal regulation. The federal regulation has been under review for a couple of years now, but there is very much a move towards, I think, the consultation process. It showed 65+% support for EPR, like extended producer responsibility, similar to what is in Europe. I wouldn't say Germany leads out in front to anybody else. I think Europe is, it's further advanced in the EPR laws than we are here in Australia. But having been in the role that I am now, but also have been the CEO of the Packaging Covenant, as I said before, I have wished for many, many, many times over the years that there was one place in the world that was doing this better than the rest of us, and we could just all pick up that model and bring it back home to Australia. There's actually not. Plastic is a very pervasive issue. It is difficult. The economics are really difficult of it, and you know, Darren has touched on that. The benefit of regulation in this space is that it creates an equal playing field. Right now, you see all those brands up there that are part of SBSA. That's only a handful of us. We need to get everybody involved in this. We need to get everybody contributing. There needs to be equity in that system, and regulation can help to bring that. So we've been very much encouraging at the federal level that review to consider not just voluntary mechanisms or even co-regulatory, but mandatory participation in these types of programs, because we need the equity of everybody being at the table and everybody contributing. It's simply not viable to have a small cohort who are carrying the load for the rest of the economy. So the more that we can hope that we get some positive and progressive regulation through that review process, I think that will be a fantastic thing for all of us.
Just regard the technology side of it. We went to Germany, but I've also been to South Africa, I've been to the States, and I've been to other parts of Europe. This technology isn't new around the world. This technology is new to Australia. So we don't have any of this technology here. We don't. This will be the first of its kind, and I think over time there'll be more of it around, because we've got a big problem, right? It needs collaboration. It needs a lot of people to and as the supply chain has been built, which I didn't touch on, but I will now, is that we've got our partner in Singapore that will do it, then it'll come back to Tagleaf in Albury, and then to the brands through the packaging arm. So, you know, the likes of Coles and Woolies and that will put recycled content in through their packaging. So all of that is in place. Every bit of oil that we manufacture for the first 12 months is committed. So it's not as if we're sitting there going, what am I going to do with this oil once I make it? Because it's very challenging when you've got a 24,000 litre tank there of oil that, what am I going to do with it? So we have got commitment for the first 3,000 tonnes. So to scale that up, we've been over to South Africa. We've found a bit of kit over there and what I mean by kit is the equipment that will scale to 40 tonne a day. Now, put that in perspective, that Kit Kat wrapper that I showed you before weighs 0.3 of a gram. I need 33 million of those a day to do 10 tonne. Multiply that by 4 is how many I need every day when we're doing 40 tonne. Right? So that puts it in perspective. I know I asked Kit Kat, do you make 30 million a day? And they said, can you eat that many? I said, I'll try. But it's a matter of that's how big is the situation we've got.
Yes, please.
Thank you. First, thank you for your presentations. And it's really exciting to see that sorting and recycling facility is going to be online soon. It probably follows on from what you were saying just now, but I'm really curious about the fact that the facility has this minimum volume to be viable operating, and that almost puts in a situation where, yes, it's fantastic, we can now recycle soft plastics, but then we're reliant on producing a certain amount for that to be a viable recycling means. And I'm wondering how that balances out with if we wanted to aim for a future where we reduce the use of soft plastics. And I guess Like, do you see a future where we just accept that we always have a certain amount of soft plastic in circulation, but hopefully it is always able to just recirculate through here, which I guess, sorry for two-part question, but is there a limit to how many times plastic can go through that recycling chain, or is it get processed down to such a raw material that it's infinite how many times we can just cycle things through?
Great question, because there's about 6 questions in there, but let me try and work back. Basically, when I started in this industry 40 years ago, I was in fibre, and you can only get about 5 or 6 goes at a piece of fibre, and it's lost. With plastic, it's completely different. You can turn around and get as many as possible, because you're mixing it and you're mass balancing it with virgin material. So you can get as many times as possible. So that's number one. Number two, when you say about we need a set amount, I've already spent $12 million right now and had no return. So I'm prepared to spend another $12, $20, $30 million, because that's how much I believe in this program. This is the right packaging for the right product, and there's 350,000 tonnes. That's grown over the years because we've consumed more. It's the right packaging. We need to find a solution for that packaging, and this will. Now, I hope, and I was saying to Ian before, I left a meeting this morning, very excited to think that when I first started this mission, I wanted to go every state in Australia. And because I'm a very impatient person, I then said, no, I'm not going to do it because I can't do it now. And I then realised that you need to collaborate and you need to work with a lot of people, and that takes time. We've now got to the stage where we're bringing that along in a much quicker way, that once this 10 tonne, we'll order another one for 40 tonne, and then we'll order another one for 40 tonne, and then we're looking, I'm going to Perth in 2 weeks' time, so this is, don't tell anyone, all right? I'm going to Perth in a couple of weeks' time to look at setting something up there at 40 tonne a day. The issue is, how do we get the product? Oh, that's the big issue that we have now, is how do we get the product?
Maybe I might build on that a little bit. I think, to your question, I think it's a really valid question, but here's the reality. There's 8 billion people on this planet today. It's going to top out, they say, at about 10 billion people. 30% of the food that is produced on this planet today will be thrown away. It's mind-blowing, the scale of waste that we as humans create and consume. If you think that we are wasting 30% of the food that we're created with the current packaging we have that is optimised to ensure the longevity of food, the great danger here is that you compromise and end up with an unintended consequence, which is you step back from plastic packaging so hard and so fast that you actually create an even bigger and more substantial food waste problem. Because the problem with food waste and the significance of it is all the emissions are embodied already, all of the land and capital costs, the water, the soil, everything is already used up, and then you've thrown it into landfill and wasted that food, and then you've got the emissions that are created through the destruction of the food over a period of time. It is such a destructive cycle of waste, and I only could wish, and I say this quite often, when I retire, if there is one person that says to me that they care as much about food waste as they do about plastic packaging, I will have achieved at least one impactful thing in my career, because plastic packaging is a problem, but the problem is that we don't deal with it effectively at the end of life. We can and do have solutions for plastic packaging. The economics don't work right now, and that's something that we're looking and scaling at, and that's what the use of product stewardship and new technologies and all those kind of things are. But we also have to be very careful and very balanced in how we actually manage the overall environmental impact, because in dealing with one issue in perhaps a way that's not fully considering the life cycle impact across the system, we may actually create an infinitely greater problem with food waste. And that's something that we have to have a balanced view on. I think you had what's the question?
Yes.
Thanks. I actually had 2 questions. One is a really practical thing. My supermarket takes those soft plastics, but you were holding up the packaging that was lined with alfoil, And I always put them in the bin because I think they'll contaminate the soft plastics. So I'm doing that wrong.
Yeah, you are.
Okay, I'm doing that wrong. Fine. My other one is that a number of years ago I interviewed the founder of a company called Licella, who I think you're probably familiar with. Yep. And they're out of UNSW, founded out of UNSW. And they have a similar process, but they use supercritical water. And the thing that seemed with them, they could put any kind of plastic in there, soft and hard plastic, and recycle it. So wouldn't it be better to use, or why don't you favour that sort of approach, which would eliminate this problem of separating soft plastics and hard plastics in the first place?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, no, good question. I don't know much about the technology for Licella. I had a couple of conversations with them in the early days, but I'm no expert on their technology. One of the reasons that under heat, it separates it in a much easier way to get barrier away. But if one of the problems we've got with plastic is PET, for argument's sake, has oxygen in it. And you put oxygen in under 600 degrees, you have a combustion. So this is one of the reasons we need. There's not many pieces of plastic that we can't use. 43% of what is put onto the market is what we call a polyolefin, and that's either a polyethylene or a polypropylene. So that's the material that we can use. The smaller amounts of PET, PVC, PVDC, the reason we can't use those is under heat, chloride becomes corrosive. If you put that into metal, it will corrode it. So refineries and our plant would struggle with those sorts of things. So there is a small amount that we can't use, but we're looking at other alternatives for that. I know there's a company called Saveboard that I had initial discussions with in 2019 that we could look at opportunities there as well. So there's things underway to look at that, but the major reason is because we're looking for the majority. We're not looking to try and get every piece, because if you try and get every piece, you'll never get it right.
Actually, I tell you what, I've got a very practical example from my husband, which I'll share with you all, on how you can tell which is soft plastics. He used to refer to our red cycle bin as the bin of shame, because when you would open it, it would be full of the chip packets and the chocolates and the lollies and all the other kind of things. You're like, oh, we'll just put that in the plastic bag and get rid of it. So if that's in any way helpful, anything you might classify as a bin of shame, confectionery, all those, anything that's scrunchy, like that you can scrunch in plastic, that can go in those soft plastic bins, and that's the material that we're looking for.
One of the things I'm interested in is climate resilience in cities, and this is a key part. Obviously, self-sufficiency is the way to go in terms of power generation, so we have batteries now. I'm wondering, is there any research being done on small or micro scale processing of plastics, particularly for large apartment buildings and things like that?
There's some great work that's been done through the University of New South Wales and, Vina's work around microplants. So that kind of issue that you're discussing in terms of micro plants and the ability to scale down things, it's great for things like, MUDs, multi-unit dwelling facilities, so apartment buildings, but also once you go over the Blue Mountains in Sydney and you go a couple of hours west here in Victoria, you've got a huge problem with the collection of material. And so as soon as you go outside of a metro area, the economics in collecting soft plastics becomes incredibly difficult. So one of the things that they've been looking at in the University of New South Wales, and Professor Vina, who heads it up, is an absolute powerhouse. There's some great work they've done over the years in terms of understanding how you can create micro factories. I did some work previously also in the islands around Australia, and we had the similar problems as we do in regional areas here, which is how do you scale up solutions when the volume is actually quite small, and those micro factories are the way in which the research is thinking about how to deal with that, because not everybody has the scale or the volume necessary that you might get in a metro area like Sydney, Melbourne or Brisbane.
Thanks so much. Sorry, you may have touched on this a little bit earlier, but I was wondering what you think the appetite is and what the state of the industry is for those more biodegradable options. I know you hear things about like beeswax, soft plastic, and all these other forms that, that can kind of, work in sync. And I just wanted, if you're aware of the state of that.
Yeah, all right. You go with the technical.
I'll go with the technical. I wasn't a chemist at school, and I'm still not a chemist now, but I do have a good friend in a guy called Rob Moran, and he works at Viva Energy as a chemist, and he's answered this question for me a couple of times, and I'll try and remember what he said. The difficulty you have is because there's no chemical molecules in those plastics, they have a right on their own, but we're both in infancy situations. So if we can get them both to you cross-contaminate, you're going to lose the products. You're going to lose the molecule ones, and you're going to lose the biodegradable. So we need to work in unison together. But let's get one right first, the bigger problem first, and then we can work through the secondary one, because I think there is an option for it, but just not together.
It's a really interesting one. It's actually Ian and I were just talking about it while we were having a pie down the back there before. And I said to Ian, I said, it kills me, it breaks my heart. I said, because the reality is the system's not set up for compostables. It's set up for recycling at this point in time, to Darren's point. And in reality, unless you can get, as Ian said, a compostable that then, and as Darren said, that then works with the recyclable products, you actually just cross-contaminate, and then you end up with nothing. And so it is really, unless you are collecting that in a closed system, so it works well if you have it, say, like in a university where you can collect and get it to a recycler directly and it doesn't contaminate with anything else, or some kind of closed system, then compostables are an option. If you have home compostables, great. The danger that I sometimes see with compostables is people think they're magic packaging. I actually saw this once on the news, and they were talking, it was something in South Australia, some kind of new regulation. It was a couple of years ago. It was something about compostables, and they had a cafe owner on there, and this person was talking. They said, oh, it's fantastic. People can just drop it on the ground and it just disappears. I can tell you right now, that is not true. There is no such thing as magic packaging, and sometimes people think that compostable packaging is that. It's not. It has a place, but we've got to have a considered place for it in the current system and how we might manage it going forward as well. So definitely something that needs to be further researched and something that needs further work on it, but it doesn't have an automatic kind of place in the current system, which makes it, a little bit more difficult to manage.
How is SPSA funded?
So SPSA is funded through the brands that will pay an annual fee. That annual fee, the levy, is assessed against the volume of material that you put onto the market. So I work for Coles brand. We have our own brand products. Of those own brand products, there are some that use soft plastic. There is a total tonnage amount that we use each year, and there is a cost associated with per tonne of material that you put on the market. The great thing about that type of levy model is obviously the more soft plastics you put on market, the more money that you pay. Therefore, whilst it does give you a solution to recycling material, it also encourages brands and organisations to look at alternatives, because obviously there's a cost associated with that. So what might have been cheap and easy, might have been a cheap or easy alternative before, you now think a little bit harder about that. And that's the intent of a product stewardship organisation and a levy like that, so that you actually are driving the right behaviours, which is how do we reduce it where we can initially and use it where we need it, but then where we need it, we actually have an end-of-life solution for it. So right now, all those brands that you saw represented there is a cohort of those brands, there's about 8 or 10 of us who have funded the foundation of setting up that organisation and have been funding it to date. That is a cost that we will never recover, but it's an important part of what we think is our responsibility to build out this future for soft plastics here in Australia.
I just take this opportunity to, first of all, thank our 2 speakers today for fantastic presentations. And also thank you as the audience for your engagement and your insightful questions. And I guess you've got briefings to look forward to next calendar year as well. So thank you once again.
you.